The Hidden Life of the Prophet Muhammad. A novel by Dr. A. Ahmed. This book continues the story of the Arab sugar daddy and the beautiful Indian girl, and the story of the Indian child bride and the old Arab husband, and the story of the Indian Miss World and the rage of Muslims of the world, and the story of Christina and the complete Jew, and also the story of the tears of God. They have been written in English and translated into Arabic by the author Dr. Ahmed. This story resonates with genuine love, strong resilience, and steadfast courage. I invite you to accompany me as I continue narrating the story of the rare, fabulous beauty of the Indian daughter, Ifat Khan, and her extremely beautiful mother, Rehana Khan. Before we dive in the tapestry of the story, I would like to remind the reader this novel is narrated in 6 books. Book 1, The Arab Sugar Daddy and the Beautiful Indian Girl. Book 2, The Indian Child Bride and the Old Arab Husband. Book 3, The Indian Miss World and the Rage of Muslims of the World. Book 4, Christina and the Complete Jew. Book 5, The Tears of God, Jews, Blacks, and Muslim Women. And Book 6, The Hidden Life of the Prophet Muhammad. This is an intriguing epic story which exhibits resilience, love, and sacrifice. Book 6. Exposing the unspoken life story of the Prophet of Islam, Muhammad. Copyrights. All rights are reserved. No part of this book may be reproduced, stored in a retrieval system, or transmitted in any form or by any means without the prior written permission of the author, except by a reviewer, who may quote brief passages from a review for printing in a public newspaper, general magazine, school journal, or university article. All characters in this novel are fictional, and any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, is merely coincidental. Chapter 6. The Vow of Assassination for Blasphemy. Irfan Khan was told by his mother that he was so blessed as a child. According to her, Irfan was born in the holy city of Mecca, on a Friday afternoon during the public congregational prayers, and in the holiest month of Ramadan, when all adult Muslims must fast from sunrise to sunset. The significance is magnified by his mother's story, which claims that he was born on the last Friday of Ramadan, which is known as the Laylat al-Qadr, the night of spiritual power. It is the anniversary of the night that Muslims believe the first verses of the Quran were revealed to Muhammad by the angel Gabriel. His mother claimed further that while Irfan was coming out of her womb, she heard the muezzin calling the faithful for their Friday public prayer. Irfan's mother told him many fairy-like stories about his conception and delivery. She claimed to have seen angels on the day her son was conceived in her womb, and on the day he was born. Moreover, as soon as she delivered him, she claimed she saw a huge halo of bright light coming out of her vagina, and lit the lands of the east and the west. According to his mother, Irfan's father was a very wealthy Muslim from the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. She also told him that his father was a very handsome man. Oddly, his father was a Saudi but looked as fair as a white man. She went on to tell Irfan that his father was one of the richest men in the holy city of Mecca. He was a multimillionaire and a business tycoon. And so her story went. According to another version of that long story, Irfan lived with his Arabian father and Indian mother for 3 years in the holy city. Then, his mother quarreled with her Saudi husband because he took another wife, which resulted in their estrangement and subsequent divorce. She returned to India with her son, where she was attracted to a handsome young man, whom she fell in love with and married. After a short stint in Mumbai, Irfan Khan along with his mother and stepfather emigrated to the United States of America. In the 10 years abroad, the family welcomed 2 new baby boys, and his mother divorced his stepfather, and once again, returned to her homeland. Irfan, of course, was now old enough to understand why his mother insisted on a divorce. His stepfather, like his father before him, fell in love with a young Indian girl and married her. It was a second Islamic marriage, permissible in Islam to have 2 wives at the same time, but illegal in the States. Therefore, his first marriage records prevented him from registering for his second marriage, the first being already documented at the point of emigration. Irvin was devastated when his mother returned to India. For one, he was never fond of India and her crowds of people. He found Mumbai city exceedingly crowded and filthy, filled with touts, cheats, and rude, belligerent natives. In a setting that was disorderly and stained with dirt, the streets were packed with vendors, pickpockets, gangsters, urchins, loafers, beggars, prostitutes, and stray animals. Irvin was 14 when his mother took him out of an expansive, beautiful, and clean city in the first world and brought him to the filthiest city he had ever seen in his life. At first, he incessantly nagged his mother to return to America. All hopes were dashed when his mother somehow found a third love interest and married him. His new stepfather was the devil incarnate. His former stepfather loved him and treated him as his flesh and blood. The second stepfather was overtly religious to the point where he was deprived of any kind of worldly entertainment. Everything that Irvin was used to in America was now taboo. His new stepfather considered them to be haram, forbidden, and entirely against Islamic moral standards. Anything found on his laptop, iPad, and iPhone was considered the creation of the accursed infidels, and would destroy the inherent good nature of a Muslim boy. Before his mother married her third husband, Irvin never once prayed to Allah. He simply lived an agnostic existence. He lived for the moment and filled his time with pleasurable pursuits. Whatever would give him joy and pleasure was his idol and God. He knew that he was born as a Muslim. He would always identify himself as Muslim to his American friends. Irvin, however, knew nothing about his religion except a few names. He knew from his mother that Allah was supposed to be his God, with Muhammad as his prophet, and the Quran as his holy book. The first thing his new stepfather did was to force him to pray to Allah, regularly, 5 times a day. The complete and utter change left him with no other choice but to comply, resulting in him being brainwashed. His 10 early years in the U.S. had left him Americanized to a large degree. His return to India and his mother's marriage to a mullah, who just happened to be the imam of the largest mosque in the Muslim-dominated town of Mumbai, within the cosmopolitan confines of Mumbai, resulted in him being divested of his Western values and becoming Islamized. Irvin did well in his religious studies and mastered all the teachings of Islam. He showed a great zeal for his religion and became a very dedicated Muslim. He memorized the entire book of the Quran and a great many hadiths of the Prophet Muhammad. Irvin considered himself blind, but now he could see. He always bragged among his Muslim friends that he returned from America as an infidel and became a true Muslim in India. He often said that, if he were still in America, he would have been shot and killed in a bar or died a miserable death as a drug addict. It was common for him to end his prayers to Allah with praises for bringing him back to his native country, opening his eyes to the truth of Islam, showing him the way to Jannah, paradise, and rescuing him from Al-Nar, hellfire. True to his militant training, he hated everything that was un-Islamic and everyone who was not a Muslim. He hated Hindus, Hinduism, and Hindustan. He loved Muslims and all the attendant Muslim lands. He longed to return to the holy city of Mecca where he was born to spend time in the proximity of the holy Kaaba, the black house of Allah. He despised everything Western and hated the brothers of apes and pigs, the Jews and Christians, with abject loathing and derision. Irvin Khan eventually came out of his mold like the followers of the Nigerian Muslim terrorist group known as Boko Haram, which incidentally means Western education is forbidden. This explains why they kidnapped over 300 Christian schoolgirls, put them in burqas, and began to teach them only the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad. Boko Haram's terrorists abolished, banned Western education, and vowed to blow up every school with a Western curriculum. One might want to know what they mean by Western education. This group is focused on establishing a pure Islamic state ruled by the Sharia only and halting all forms of westernization. They believe that schools, universities, TV, radio, print, art, architecture, etc. have insidiously westernized the Muslim youth. At this point, Irvin's love and zest for Islam, and his attendant hatred toward non-Muslims remained principle that had never been acted upon. While not a bona fide Muslim terrorist, he had potentiality. Irvin nursed a powerful desire to travel to Turkey, Syria, or Iraq to become one of the Islamic State soldiers of jihad against the infidels. Whenever the FBI foiled an imminent terrorist plot, invariably with the help of an informant, it is common to hear testimonies from classmates and neighbors of the suspects insisting on how they were exemplary students and good neighbors. What they are telling you is that a terrorist is not a criminal or morally perverse person that one recognizes through his antisocial behavior. He appears to people around him as friendly, morally sound, and benign to his neighbors, classmates, or colleagues. He appears friendly and sociable but harbors hatred and bitterness to all who are not Muslim. He is like the Pharisee, a social hypocrite. All the Muslim terrorists like whitewashed tombs, which look beautiful on the outside but house decaying, unclean remains of the dead. Before exposure, if any, they appear to the people as righteous, but on the inside, they are full of hypocrisy and wickedness. Irvin's hatred simmered like a dormant volcano. The Hollywood movie of the Indian Child Bride and the Old Arab Man of Saudi Arabia supplied the impetus for his volcano. He had not been to a movie theater for a long time, but coming out of a particular Friday public prayer, he heard his stepfather condemning a movie from the pulpit. He mentioned it by name and described it as the most offensive and inaccurate representation of the beautiful life story of the Prophet Muhammad. The Imam, the stepfather, wept, and all the congregation wept with him while he was condemning the provocateurs. The sermon catalyzed Irvin, who went to the market to pick up an illegal DVD copy of one of the many pavement hawkers. When Irvin Khan watched the movie, he was aghast that anyone could depict his gracious Prophet Muhammad in such a disrespectful and disgraceful manner. To Irvin's warped mind, this could only be a threat to the Islamic world. The world now thought that the Prophet Muhammad had married a 6-year-old female child, tied her up for 3 years, and raped her when she was 9. Irvin did not believe for a second that his holy prophet could do such evil deeds with a female child of 6 years of age. Although Irvin, like many Muslims, had read the Quran and the hadiths of the founder of Islam, and should have known the case of his prophet's child bride, Aisha, still, he was taught that his prophet Muhammad was perfect, infallible, and did not commit a single sin. He always heard exceptionally good things about his prophet. He had beautiful and heroic images of the Prophet of Islam floating around in his subconscious. He learned that his Prophet Muhammad was the master of creation, created spiritually, morally, and intellectually in perfect form, came to complete the moral perfections, sent as a mercy to mankind, etc. Nonetheless, the Hollywood movie likened the Prophet Muhammad to the foot or shoe of the author and depicted him as a despicable pedophile. Deliberately, Irvin Khan placed his right hand on his holy Quran and proclaimed a solemn vow that he would not rest until he had killed the blasphemous Indian slum girl. His faith was now being challenged and was at risk. The first thing Irvin did was to find out where the Indian slum girl lived. Sifting through media reports, he now knew that other brave lions of jihad had already dealt with the director of the movie, Rita Smith. He soon learned that the Indian female author of the blasphemous book resided in America. To fulfill his mission, it needs to be that he find his way there. An American visa was not out of reach since he had already established residency. His memories of the country were still vivid. Chapter 7. Mustafa Abdul Gawad. Irvin Khan approached the American consulate in Mumbai to apply for a visa. His application was conditionally approved pending customary medical checkups. Since he was physically fit to travel and posed no health risks, everything fell into place except for one small significant detail. After completing his medical checkup, the American consulate gave him a form that required endorsement from the Mumbai CID, Criminal Investigation Department. The CID refused to endorse his travel. His religious activities had been noticed, and he was considered a Mumbai Muslim zealot, and thus a travel risk. The anti-terrorist police had a big dossier on him, full of information fed by informants and other sources. The police had also arrested 2 members of Irvin's mosque and charged them with conspiracy to carry out terrorist attacks on the city. The law enforcement of Mumbai is suspected of strong links with the Pakistani ISI, Inter-Service Intelligence, and the Lashkar-e-Taiba terrorist group, Army of the Pure. Pakistan is the only country in the world whose government works hand in hand with designated terrorist groups and militants to wage proxy wars against its neighbors. It was common to see Pakistani ISI signatures on the Lashkar-e-Taiba terrorists and other militants' plots on Indian soil. A routine bust by the Mumbai anti-terrorist team failed to produce sufficient direct evidence to indict, and the Indian courts were forced to acquit 2 of their suspects. In the course of the duo's interrogation, one of them had fingered Irvin Khan as one of their acquaintances. This bit of data was entered into the record, and from then on, he was considered an Islamic radical. Given his association, the CID department refused to endorse his intent to travel. Irvin tried everything to expunge the records but failed. Then, he approached the American consulate and explained his situation to them. Not surprisingly, they ignored his appeal. Irvin Khan went from irritated to furious. He didn't like that the system had already tagged him as a radical without due process. He only had contempt for a system that discriminated against him solely based on his religious commitment. In the meantime, his resolve to inflict grievous hurt on the Indian slum girl raged unabated. He particularly bristled at the way the Hindus of India and the infidels of the West considered them the laughingstock of the world. Irvin Khan did not give up. He decided to carry out his plan regardless of personal cost. At first, he planned to execute the hit as a lone wolf. The closure of all entry points nudged him to share his plan with his stepfather and some close friends at the mosque. His stepfather welcomed the idea and considered it a great honor for a Muslim young man to exhibit such zeal and love for his prophet. He agreed to the idea and execution of the plan. The more they discussed it, the old man found himself entirely determined to help his stepson reach America, proposing financing and all material requirements. The other zealots agreed and likewise threw in their full support behind Irvin. The Muslim conspiracy collected around 50 lakhs, 5 million Indian rupees, and deposited the entire amount in Irvin Khan's bank account. That amount was collected from the faithful as zakat. Al-zakat is a term used in Islamic finance to refer to the obligation that an individual has to pay a certain proportion of his wealth each year to charitable causes. It corresponds to the idea of tithes in the Bible, but the individual pays more than 10% of his income. All the designated Muslim terrorist groups such as Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Boko Haram, Janjaweed, Al-Shabaab, Hezbollah, Ansar Allah, Hamas, Muslim Brotherhood, CARE, Council on American Islamic Relations, Lashkar-e-Taiba, the Army of Muhammad, Taliban, and the like are funded by a compulsory zakat from individuals through the mosques in Muslim as well as secular countries. The Imam of the Grand Mosque at Mumbai, Sheikh al-Din Khan, now assumed full charge of the assassination plan and assumed the role of main mastermind. Under the blessings and guidance of his stepfather, the stepson was ordered to travel to Pakistan. Since he was not allowed to fly out via India, Irvin was smuggled by Indian and Pakistani radicals out of the country via the Jammu-Kashmir provinces. His stepfather sent him to a famous and popular imam in Lahore city, who had already been briefed by Imam Sheikh al-Din Khan of his son's heroic cause. Upon his arrival, Irvin Khan was received by the Pakistani imam in Lahore city as a great Muslim hero and accorded royal treatment. In the second step in the plan, the Pakistani imam had to help Irvin Khan to change his first name and last name to ease into his new identity as a Pakistani Muslim. Through forgery and bribery, Irfan Khan now became Mustafa Abdul Gawad. Mustafa was the name of one of the Imam's sons, and Abdul Gawad was his last name. The birth certificate and the ration card of the son were used to effect his identity switch. At the Lahore Grand Mosque, Zakat collections added 70 lakhs of Pakistan rupees to his coffers, 7 million. The new Mustafa Abdul Gawad was fluent in American English, given his time there. It was common knowledge that a Pakistani-born Muslim would find it exceedingly difficult to get a tourist visa to the USA, considering he did not have any relatives stateside. His most viable option was to travel on a student visa. He decided to pose as an ambitious Pakistani student trying to gain admission into a prestigious American college. Due to the huge and vast differences in the academic standards between America and Pakistan, such demand was next to impossible. Therefore, the prerequisite for a student visa was a certifiable admission to an American Institute of Higher Learning. To get that, Mustafa Abdul Gawad would need decent scores from TOEFL, Test of English as a Foreign Language, and GRE, Graduate Record Examination. This entailed exceedingly high fees, and a pass was not enough to guarantee admission. A successful applicant would have to demonstrate high intelligence and ace all the exams. Language skills aside, as intelligent as he was, Mustafa needed bona fide examination results from the collegiate-level exams to qualify. It took him a year to prepare and pass the TOEFL and GRE, and gain admission into an American Institute of Higher Learning. As soon as his admission was verified, he applied for a student visa. His American student visa was issued after the usual medical and Pakistani police clearances, the latter being cleared upon a huge bribe paid by the Lahore Imam. Mustafa Abdul Gawad was now free to fly off to the United States of America. Chapter 8. On being a woman in Islam. During his 1 year in Lahore, Mustafa Abdul Gawad married a 14-year-old girl. She was the daughter of one of the jihadists in the mosque. His marriage to that girl was just meant to satisfy his lust temporarily. He knew that eventually, he would end up in America, but this was never shared with either the girl or her father. When he got the American student visa, he lied to his father-in-law that he was going to apply for a spousal visa as soon as he reached America. However, in his heart, he longed to die as a martyr, and with that, his reward of 72 virgins of paradise who were 1,000,000 times more beautiful than his earthly wife. That his Pakistani wife was 6 months pregnant did not delay his departure in the least. The Quranic concept of the virgins of paradise makes Muslim men treat Muslim women like dirt, and use them just to satisfy their lust temporarily. Every Muslim man despises the women of this earth, and yearns for the virgins of paradise. Islam teaches that the women of this earth are unclean, unfaithful, deficient in religion and intellect, condemned by Allah, and are already on their respective journeys to hell. Perhaps the best way to bring out this point correctly is to refer to what the most influential and greatest Muslim theologian and scholar Abu Hamad al-Ghazali mentions about women. The Imam al-Ghazali is called the greatest Muslim scholar of all time. He is considered to be the greatest Muslim theologian, scholar, philosopher, and thinker who ever existed besides the Prophet Muhammad. The defender of Islam, as he is frequently referred to, has authored around 1,000 books on the fiqh of Islam, Islamic jurisprudence. The Muslim historian Ibn Khaldun described fiqh as knowledge of the rules of God which concern the actions of persons who find themselves bound to obey the law respecting what is required, wajib, sinful, haram, recommended, mandab, disapproved, makruh, or neutral, mubah, the Islamic sciences. In his renowned book, The Revival of the Religious Sciences, Imam al-Ghazali defines the woman's role as, 1. She should stay at home and get on with her spinning. 2. She can go out only in emergencies. 3. She must not be well informed, nor must she be communicative with her neighbors and only visit them when absolutely necessary. 4. She should take care of her husband, respect him in his presence and his absence and seek to satisfy him in everything. 5. She must not leave her house without his permission, and if given his permission she must leave secretly. 6. She should put on old clothes and take deserted streets and alleys, avoid markets, and make sure that a stranger does not hear her voice, her footsteps, smell her, or recognize her. 7. Her sole worry should be her all-bud, reproductive organ or her pussy, her home as well as her prayers and her fasting, starvation for Allah. 8. If a friend of her husband comes when her husband is absent, she must not open the door nor reply to him to safeguard her all-bud, her vagina. 9. She should accept what her husband gives her as sufficient sexual needs at any moment. 10. She should be clean and ready to satisfy her husband's sexual needs at any moment. The greatest theologian warns all Muslim men to be careful of women, for their guile is immense, and their mischief is noxious, they are immoral and mean-spirited. Al-Ghazali also states, it is a fact that all the trials, misfortunes and woes which befall men come from women. In his book, Counsel for Kings, Imam al-Ghazali sums up all that a woman is fated to endure her lot because of Eve's sin in the Garden of Eden. When Eve ate the fruit which he had forbidden to her from the tree in paradise, the Lord, be he praised, cursed women with 17 punishments. 1. Menstruation. 2. Childbirth. 3. Separation from her father and mother and marriage to a stranger. 4. Pregnancy. 5. Not having control over her person. 6. A lesser share in inheritance, 1/2 of the male entitlement as per the Quran. 7. Her liability to be divorced and inability to initiate divorce. 8. Acknowledge the law allowing a man to have 4 wives, but for a woman to have only 1 husband. 9. The fact that she must stay secluded in the house. 10. The fact that she must keep her head covered inside the house. 11. The fact that the weight of 2 women's testimonies has to be set against the testimony of a man. 12. The fact that she must not venture beyond the house unless accompanied by a nearby relative. 13. The fact that men take part on Friday and feast days, public prayers and funerals, while women do not. 14. Disqualification for leadership and judgeship. 15. The fact that merit has 1,000 components, only one of which is attributable to women, while 999 are attributable to men. 16. The fact that if women are profligate they will be given twice as much torment as to the rest of the community at the resurrection day. 17. The fact that if their husbands die, they must observe a waiting period of 3 months and 10 days before remarrying. The idea that a woman's sole purpose and duty is to stay at home to satisfy the sexual appetite of her husband is again summed up in Al-Ghazali's book, Proof of Islam. The Imam al-Ghazali is called the defender of Islam as well as the proof of Islam. This most influential thinker of Islam has molded the minds of billions of Muslims with his opinions on the woman's character. If you relax the woman's leash a tiny bit, she will take you and bolt wildly. Their deception, women, is awesome, and their wickedness is contagious. Bad character and feeble mind are their predominant traits. Al-Ghazali also exhorted women, a wife should never refuse her all-bud, her vagina, to her husband even if it is on the saddle of a camel. This advice is always quoted by Islamic religious leaders in the Muslim world. It was recently quoted by the Damned Obedient Wives Club in Malaysia. This strange advice is taken from a hadith of the Prophet Muhammad, where he said that the wife should not say no to her husband's sexual need even if the two are sitting on the saddle of a moving camel. Al-Ghazali forbids those Muslim men who teach their women to read and write by saying, "Do not add evil to unhappiness." He quotes his Prophet Muhammad's hadith, "Prevent women from learning to read and write, or adopt positions opposite to those of women." There is great virtue in such opposition. As the supreme jurist, Al-Ghazali defined marriage for Muslims. Marriage is a form of slavery. The woman is man's slave and her duty, therefore, is absolute obedience to the husband in all that he asks of her person. Islam allows a man to marry 4 women at any one time, and to beat his wives. It allows only the man to initiate divorce, and in matters of law, reduces her testimony to half of that of a man. This renders her solitary testimony inadmissible. In addition to the other irregularities mentioned before, a man is promised 72 virgins in paradise, and the woman is fated to hellfire, etc. To compound the gender inequality, women have to contend with widespread honor killings, child marriage, and female genital mutilation. Although there are so many injustices against women in Islam, but biggest evil has to be female genital mutilation, FGM. It is based on 3 authentic hadiths of the Prophet Muhammad which advocate female genital mutilation as compulsory for all Muslim women. 1. Amatiyya al-Ansari narrated that a woman used to circumcise in Medina, and the Prophet said to her, "Do not overdo it, because this makes woman more favorable, and it is more agreeable." Sahih al-Bukhari. 2. Aisha narrated that the Prophet Muhammad said, "When a man sits between her 4 parts, legs and arms of his wife, and the 2 circumcised parts meet, the husband's penis and the wife's vagina, then ghusl, ablution, becomes obligatory." Sahih Muslim. 3. The Prophet Muhammad said, "Circumcision is a sunnah for men and a preservation of honor for women." Abu Malik and Abu Dawud. This important topic of FGM has been already discussed in Book 5 of these 6 volumes novel, but we need to relook at it again from a slightly distinct perspective. According to the Prophet Muhammad, female genital mutilation is a preservation of honor for women, Sunan Abu Dawud. Following the commandment of their Prophet, the majority of Muslims circumcise their female children with the belief that such practice helps their daughters preserve family honor. According to the World Health Organization, WHO, female genital mutilation, FGM, is practiced in 28 countries in Western, Eastern, and Northeastern Africa, in parts of Asia and the Middle East countries, and within some immigrant communities in Europe, America, Canada, Australia, and South America. The WHO has offered 4 classifications of FGM. The main practiced ones are Type 1, Type 2, and Type 3. Type 1 is the removal of the clitoral hood, almost invariably accompanied by the removal of the clitoris itself, clitoridectomy. Type 2 is the removal of the clitoris and inner labia. Type 3 is known as infibulation. It involves the removal of all or part of the inner and outer labias, and usually the clitoris, and the fusion of the wound, leaving a small hole for the passage of urine and menstrual blood. The small aperture does not allow for the full and proper discharge of menstrual blood and tissue. The remaining blood causes many kinds of sicknesses in the girl. Case study, by Jacques Lantier. Quoted in excerpts from Fran P. Hoskin. The Hoskin Report, Genital and Sexual Mutilation of Females. 4th Revised Edition, Women's International Network News, Lexington, Massachusetts, 1993, pages 114 to 115, 1992 to 202, 216 to 218. The child, completely naked, is made to sit on a low stool. Several women take hold of her and open her legs wide. After separating her outer and inner lips, the operator, usually a woman experienced in this procedure, sits down facing the child. With her kitchen knife, the operator first pierces and slices open the hood of the clitoris. Then she begins to cut it out. While another woman wipes off the blood with a rag, the operator digs with her sharp fingernail a hole the length of the clitoris to detach and pull out the organ. The little girl, held down by the women helpers, screams in extreme pain, but no one pays the slightest attention. The operator finishes this job by entirely pulling out the clitoris and cutting it to the bone with her knife. Her helpers again wipe off the spurting blood with a rag. The operator then removes the remaining flesh, digging with her finger to remove any remnant of the clitoris from among the flowing blood. The neighbor women are then invited to plunge their fingers into the bloody hole to verify that every piece of the clitoris is removed. This operation is not always well managed, as the little girl struggles. It often happens that by clumsy use of the knife, or a poorly executed cut, the urethra is pierced or the rectum is cut open. If the little girl faints, the women blow pili pili, spice powder, into her nostrils. But this is not the end. The most important part of the operation begins only now. After a brief moment, the woman takes the knife again and cuts off the inner lips, labia minora, of the victim. The helpers again wipe the blood with their rags. Then the operator, with a swift motion of her knife, begins to scrape the skin from the inside of the large lips, labia majora. The operator conscientiously scrapes the flesh of the screaming child without the slightest concern for the extreme pain she inflicts. When the wound is large enough, she adds some lengthwise cuts and several more incisions. The neighbor women carefully watch her work and encourage her. The child now howls even more. Sometimes in a spasm, children bite off their tongues. The women carefully watch to prevent such an accident. When her tongue flops out, they throw spice powder on it, hot red chili, which provokes an instant pulling back of the organ. With the abrasion of the skin completed according to the rules, the operator closes the bleeding large lips and fixes them one against the other with long acacia thorns. At this stage of the operation, the child is so exhausted that she stops crying but often has convulsions. The woman then forced down her throat a concoction of plants. The operator's chief concern is to leave an opening no larger than a kernel of corn, or just big enough to allow urine, and later the menstrual flow, to pass. The family honor depends on making the opening as small as possible because with the Somalis, the smaller the artificial passage is, the greater the value of the girl, and the higher the bride price. When the operation is finished, the woman pours water over the genital area of the girl and wipes her with a rag. Then the child, who was held down all this time, is made to stand up. The women then immobilize her thighs by tying them together with ropes of goatskin. This bandage is applied from the knees to the waist of the girl and is left in place for about 2 weeks. The girl must remain lying on a mat for the entire time, while all the excrement remains with her in the bandage. After that time, the girl is released and the bandage is cleaned. Her vagina is now closed, except for a tiny opening created by the insertion of a straw or reed, and remains closed until her marriage. Contrary to what one would assume, few girls die from this torture. There are, of course, various complications, which frequently leave the girl crippled and disabled for the rest of her life, referring to the same reference. Chapter 9. The Unexpected Visitor. Christina Lewinsky opted to avoid the limelight, opting to spend her time with her loving family. She put the little Indian slum girl to rest, her heart at peace. After all, she had done all she could, and had come about as close to closure as one could have expected. Her life after the movie was simply a meandering, wonderful time with a loving husband and lovely daughters, Ifit and Aphrodite. One day, quite unexpectedly, a door that had taken a lifetime to close burst wide open, flooding her life with the unpleasant malodorous wind of an abused childhood. The last person that she had expected to think of her, all the way from India, had brought the fetid wind with him. She felt it, like a mighty hurricane whose purpose was to uproot, destroy, and wreck everything she had built. It felt like a dead relative had been resurrected, and was asking for his due. It was her biological mother, Begum Rehanaji Sheikh al-Din Khan. The same woman who abandoned her in the deserts of Saudi Arabia, and vehemently denied and disowned her in an Indian court, was now at her threshold, begging for forgiveness. Up to that point, Christina would have forgiven anyone who had wronged her, with one exception, her biological mother. If the old Saudi had been resurrected from hell and placed at her doorstep, she would have accepted his apology. She had endlessly tried to make excuses for her mother's rejection of her that day, but found herself mute. Her mother tried to explain why she could not admit in court that Christina was her Ifit. Her Muslim terrorist husband, Sheikh al-Din Khan, had threatened to kill her daughter, Ifit/Christina, slaughter her 3 sons, and also murder her if she testified that the apostate Muslim girl who became an infidel Christian was none other than her daughter. To ensure compliance, he had 2 of his terrorists accompany her in court. As she got to her feet to testify in the witness box, they shifted in their seats and stared at her, drumming the warning home. It was obvious that the thugs were carrying loaded pistols concealed in their Islamic pajamas. Courts in India, for the longest time, have required full-body checks and security scanning. Almost like airports. However, through bribery and threats, the 2 Muslim terrorists have clandestinely smuggled in their guns. So Rehana had no choice but to comply and ensure Ifat's safety. Then the mother gently reminded her daughter of her sacrifice, when she came to know that her daughter had fallen in love with her husband and deprived her of her life's love. She told her that for her sake she divorced her husband, sacrificed her love, forsook her comfortable life in America, returned to India, and married the evilest man she had ever known in her life. That evil mullah treated her as his sex slave, and imprisoned her in his house in Mumbai for many years, until death had released her from his tyranny. Shortly after smuggling his stepson into Lahore for a terrorist mission, Imam Sheikh al-Din Khan was killed in a police encounter by the anti-terrorist police of Mumbai. The police encounter is an Indian euphemism for a situation in which a gangster or a terrorist is cornered, and when asked to surrender, chooses not to surrender peacefully, and is shot dead. It was not his first encounter with the law enforcement of Mumbai. The Imam had been arrested a few times before along with his radical associates. Each time, they were ordered by the courts to be set free for lack of evidence. As such, the anti-terrorist team decided to deal with the terrorist Imam in their distinct way. While Sheikh al-Din Khan was going to conduct his 4 o'clock morning prayer at his mosque, the anti-terrorist police dispatched him with a headshot from the rear and planted a loaded gun by his side. When the people of Mumbai woke up that morning, they read in the local newspapers that their righteous Imam was killed in a police encounter. His congregation buried him on the same day and considered him a Muslim shaheed, martyr. Many would swear that day by their Allah and Holy Quran that they would, sooner or later, avenge the blood of their great Imam and Mullah. After that, Rehana began relating how she had come to know of her daughter's recent problems and her whereabouts. One fateful day, an Indian TV documentary aired The Child Bride and the Old Man of Arabia in English. It did not take Rehana long to recognize her daughter. She then went to the market and obtained a copy of the controversial movie. She watched it in horror, with her tears falling like molten wax. Before watching the movie, she had thought that her daughter suffered a lot under the cruelty of the old Arab man. She had no idea of the amount of abuse her daughter had endured as a wife to the old Saudi man. It hurt her that her daughter had to walk that part of her life all alone, and held herself responsible for all the evil that had descended upon her daughter. She decided to find her no matter what the cost might be, knowing her daughter was in America. Through the documentary, she came to know that her daughter had married an American and adopted his name. When Rehana shared her findings with her 2 sons, they reacted negatively. Her firstborn son Irfan Khan disappeared one day, and she had never heard anything about him after that. Even his stepfather claimed ignorance. The 2 sons flatly stated that they had no intention of associating with a sister who had forsaken Islam and embraced the corrupted religion of the infidels, Christianity. More damning, they considered her book an unbearable shame and a stigma against the Muslims. Despite Rehana's pleading for help, they were unwavering in their resolve and turned away, offering none. Accepting that her sons would not lift a finger to help her in her quest, Rehana decided to go back to America alone and start her search for her daughter. Her sons had left her with the choice of choosing between them or their sister. They openly told her that if she returned to America for the sake of that accursed Murtada and Kafira, an apostate and infidel, they would never accept her again as their mother. Rehana Khan chose to forsake her 2 sons. She had now lost everything but her quest. She was once again back in square one. She lost her first son, Irfan Khan, whom she conceived when she was raped in the Sahara Desert by 2 Saudi policemen. She lost her third husband, Sheikh al-Din Khan, to a police encounter. Her 2 sons, Rafiq Khan and Javed Khan, from her second marriage with her ex-lover Jamal, had effectively disowned her. Their Muslim father, her second husband, Jamal Khan, cheated on her and fell in love with her daughter, Ifat Khan. Rehana had already lost 5 sons, Abu Bakr, Omar, Osman, Ali, and Muhammad, who were born to her, along with her only daughter, Ifat, from her first marriage. When she traveled to Saudi Arabia and left them with her mother in India, all 5 ran away from home, becoming perpetual fugitives and vagabonds in the streets of Mumbai. To her only daughter, Ifat Khan, Rehana decided to put things right, seeking forgiveness and reconciliation. Upon her return to America, she had no address, phone number, or any means of locating her daughter. The only clue she had was her daughter's new name, Christina Lewinsky. She tried to find her through the FBI, but they politely declined to disclose any information. She was told that since the assassination of the Indian-American movie director, Rita Smith, the author of the book, The Child Bride and the Old Men of Arabia, the FBI would not divulge personal information unless the request was endorsed by law. Out of curiosity, one may ask how the wife of a terrorist imam can get a visa to the US, and the Indian cops okayed her flight out. No wonder some close members of the family of the mastermind behind the September 11th attacks, Osama bin Laden, flew freely from country to country in Europe until they died in a UK plane crash on July 31, 2015. Among the dead are his sister, Sana bin Laden, and her husband, Zuhair Hashim. After that, Rehana decided to search the old-fashioned way. She tracked the first and last name of her daughter. She started with American women who answered to the same name, contacting them to verify their identity. What made her task a monumental one was the fact that she could not narrow it down to any particular state or city. She could have spent years writing and calling without making any headway. For all she knew, she could die of old age even before going through half of the 50 states. The die-cast, Rehana Khan, set to the task. Whether one should call it a miracle or rare luck, her search did not last more than a few months before she was able to find her daughter. After spending abbreviated time phoning and writing to the Christina Lewinskys in her state, Rehana found her daughter. When her daughter responded, she recognized her accent and reverted to Urdu. Rehana did not reveal her reason for calling, who she was, or why she had phoned. She just pretended that she had dialed by mistake. A few days later, Rehana Khan flew in and knocked on her door. Opening her door, her daughter saw her standing in front of her house and recognized her immediately. Christina felt as if the door of hell had been pried open again, and with it, a bitter aftertaste of her past rose like a bile. Christina's first reflex was to tell her mother to go away, or be escorted by the police. Her resolve crumbled when her mother fell to her feet and began to cry loudly and beg for forgiveness. Christina's husband and 2 daughters came running to the door. At first, Christina did not react to the Indian woman sobbing and crying at her feet. Christina had already told her 2 daughters that their Muslim grandmother had died before they were born. When her Hindu mother came back to her life, Christina made her children believe that Rani Krishna was the only true grandmother because she was the one who saved her life and adopted her as her daughter. But Rani Krishna had already married a white guy who became a Hindu like her, and both, husband and wife, adopted 2 female orphans from a Hindu ashram in Pune, India. No surprise that Christina's 2 daughters were at a total loss. Astonished to see an Indian woman supplicating at their mother's feet, bitterly crying, and pleading in a language they did not understand. Her husband was intuitive enough to figure something was amiss. When pressed, Christina admitted her relationship to their uninvited guest. Chapter 10. Standing face to face in front of death. Coincidentally, Mustafa Abdul Gawad, who sorely lacked leads to his target, used the same trial and error method to pinpoint Christina Lewinsky's location. Media reports indicated that Ifat Khan and Christina Lewinsky were the same. He spent time in college, blending in and establishing himself before embarking on the next phase of his mission. He had ascertained that his target lived in a small town just a few hours away. His next move was to purchase a firearm, a black market pistol, since he could never qualify for a pistol permit or a concealed weapons permit. A rifle or shotgun would be far too obtrusive and unwieldy. Once he had confirmed her home address, he made his way to the Lewinsky residence. It was on a Saturday morning when he arrived in the quiet small town. His long beard and Pakistani clothes stood out among the residents of the peaceful town and made many uneasy. Arriving at the residence of his target, Mustafa was startled to see his mother living under the roof of the very girl he had come to kill. Scanning the house from a safe distance, he sighted the family members at the front door with his hunting binoculars from across the street. The confines of his car did nothing to ease the creeping frantic feelings arising from the mixed feelings he was now confronted with. Mustafa vaguely remembered a Christian girl visiting his house many years ago claiming to be the daughter of his mother, Begum Rehanaji Sheikh al-Din Khan. At that time, he had brushed it off, considering the intrusion trivial. He was told by his mother that she had not married a man before his pseudo-Saudi father. Moreover, his mother had vehement denials sealed the matter for him. It must have been a matter of mistaken identity, and the court ruling closed the issue. It now dawned upon him that the apostate with his mother was exactly who she had claimed to be. He had come all this way only to kill his sister. As he grappled with his realization, his mother and the Lewinskys got into their van. Like any Muslim terrorist, despite his misgivings, there was no doubt Mustafa Abdul Gawad was prepared to kill his parents if they happened to come between him and his God-sent mission. It was the first time for Rehana Khan, accompanied by her new family, at Blue Lake. By then, she had already spent a few months in her daughter's house. The rift between them had closed with Christina's unconditional forgiveness and the time and space for healing. It didn't take much for Rehana to decide to end her days with her long-lost daughter and granddaughters. She did not doubt that her daughter was a Christian. She remained true to her faith, explaining to her daughter that she was born a Muslim and would live and die as one. Understandably, she did not join them in their prayers and Bible readings. Each Sunday, she spent her time alone while her new family made their way to their church. Rehana had become religious after her third marriage. It was part of her to pray 5 times a day, recite the Quran, and fast all the 30 holy days of Ramadan. Tailing the Lewinsky van to Blue Lake, Mustafa assessed the situation and decided that his mission was nearing completion. A few families and couples were in the vicinity, making the most of their weekend. Mustafa parked his car and eased out of it, taking care of his mother in his field of vision. She walked behind her granddaughters, while Christina and her husband busied themselves unloading their picnic paraphernalia. Mustafa clasped the pistol in his pocket to reassure himself it was still there and readied himself. He visualized changing the peaceful scene into a landscape of horror and carnage. The mighty hand of Allah would use his hand and shoot the blasphemous girl in the head, and avenge the blessed final prophet to mankind. Allah was going to guide the bullet which was going to take the life of the girl who blasphemed the master of all creation, the one who was sent as mercy to the worlds, and the seal of all the messengers of Allah. Mustafa Abdul Gawad was expected to be apprehended after his mission was successfully executed. He decided not to kill his brother-in-law, his nieces, or his mother unless they tried to thwart him. Then he would leave the scene in his car, abandon it after driving it a fair distance, and continue his journey on foot. He knew that witnesses would probably note the car registration, and he would have to ditch it. Mentally rehearsing each step of his plan, he closed in on the van and his sister. He was close enough to touch her when he pulled out his pistol, and had it at point-blank range to her head. A flashback: Mustafa Abdul Gawad was able to deceive the American consulate in Lahore during his student visa application. The officer interviewing him harbored doubts about his story, and escalated his concerns to his superior, explaining that his fluency in English, his lack of a Pakistani accent, and his facility with English conversation pointed to the fact that he neither grew up in Pakistan nor was he raised in a Pakistani home. He suspected a Western upbringing, and it made no sense. His superior advised that it was against their policy to discriminate against a Pakistani student simply because of his foreign accent. His objection was overruled, and Mustafa got his student visa and flew to the United States of America. In his freshman year, someone else noticed a suspicious discrepancy and reported him to the resident assistant. The complaint was ignored because, again, it looked like the complaint was racially motivated, the complainant being an Indian Hindu. From then on, it was plain sailing for Mustafa. He looked at the role of the international student. He attended his classes while searching for his target. This is an excellent example of how political correctness and appeasement of Muslims are weakening the USA and jeopardizing lives. The initial phase of his search depended on the internet. He did complex searches combing names, keywords, and phrases. The resultant list of Christina Lewinsky's was manageable. He knew without a doubt that the Christina Lewinsky he was looking for was once a Muslim waif from the slums of Mumbai. She would be conversant in Hindi and Urdu with a slight trace of an accent. All he needed to do was call. The list continued to shrink. Mustafa's search went unnoticed for a long time. Towards the last month of his search, an employee from the phone company noticed that all his calls were to women of the same name. The employee had a gut feeling something was not right. It could be that the customer was just harassing all women bearing the name Christina Lewinsky. Either way, his gut feeling took a turn for the worse when he noted the customer's name, Mustafa Abdul Gawad. Realizing that he might have uncovered something sinister, he notified his superior, got the necessary clearance, and informed the police. The initial police investigations revealed that the suspect was a Pakistani. Discreet inquiries threw more light on his character. He was known to be a very devout Muslim who kept mostly to himself and was essentially an introvert. The question as to why a strong Muslim would continue making short calls to Christina Lewinsky's remained unanswered. The police decided that it was time to question the suspect, with only circumstantial evidence pointing to a suspicious motive. They decided to watch him closely for developments. The police did not have an inkling of his plans until he arrived at the residence of his intended victim. They had been tailing him for some time now, and as a matter of routine, they followed his car as he neared the little community in which his target lived. The officers in the unmarked car kept a discreet distance. They still knew next to nothing of his plans, and the fact that he was already armed with a semi-automatic pistol. Mustafa reached Christina Lewinsky's house and eased into a strategic position to observe it, his action not lost on his observers. As the family members exited the house into their van, the officers noted some Asians in the family and realized that there might be a link between this particular Christina Lewinsky and their suspect. Something was definitely underfoot, but the officers could only guess at his point. One of them slyly mentioned that Mustafa Abdul Gawad could be involved in an affair with the pretty lady of the house, in mock exasperation. As the van left the Lewinsky, Mustafa eased his vehicle in behind them. His observers dutifully tagged along, and when the convoy stopped at Blue Lake, they parked a discreet distance away, at a spot rewarding them with an unobstructed view of the suspect. Eager not to break their cover, the officers rushed out of their patrol unit the moment they saw Mustafa pull a gun out of his pocket. The officer closest to Mustafa rushed in to meet the threat, his training kicking in. He had already had his weapon drawn when he saw Mustafa point his gun at the back of Christina's head. Had Mustafa been able to shoot immediately, they would not have been able to stop the carnage that followed. Fortunately, true to his creed, Mustafa deemed that his victim should not die without knowing why and who her executioner was. He began to speak to Christina in Urdu, cursing her, and letting her know that her fate had followed her all the way from India for her blasphemy of his gracious Prophet Muhammad, the master of creation. Then, he began to speak directly to his demigod, "O Allah, I am drawing closer to you by slaying this accursed girl, who dared to speak against your beloved Prophet Muhammad." A moment before he finished his satanic prayer, fully pronounced that abominable name, and squeezed the trigger, the officer closed the distance and fired a round into his temple, killing him immediately. If the officer delayed his shot a fraction of a second, until Mustafa finished the name Muhammad, Christina would have been another terror statistic. Rehana Khan caught a glimpse of her son just before the officer let off a shot. She recognized him immediately. She had never expected to see him again. Her late husband had once told her that Irvin had left India for Pakistan to join the Islamic jihadists. The mother hid this disturbing information from her daughter and told her quite a different story. Rehana thought that her son would not return to India after his association with the Pakistani Mujahideen. From the onset, Rehana had never been agreeable to the path her son had opted to take. The trips to the mosque with his stepfather had already conditioned him to hate India and the Hindus. She tried to convince him that Indian Muslims were living in Hindustan, and not Pakistan, and hence they should love India and all Indians. However, her son's hatred towards India and Hindus continued to fester until he saw fit to emigrate to the land of the Pakistani Muslim Mujahideen. Rehana saw the gun in her son's hand, and had also divined his intention. She wanted to shout out to him to stay his hand, and tell him that Christina was his sister. Her admonishment was drowned out in the roar of the gunshot. She crumbled to her knees, and began to cry. She naturally assumed that he had succeeded in killing his own sister. When she finally brought herself to look up, she saw her daughter standing by her husband, trembling with fear. Michael led her away from the body of the attacker. When she managed to get to her feet, Rehana saw her son crumbled by the van with an ever-expanding pool of blood and cerebral matter wringing his head. Michael tried to explain to his mother-in-law what he thought had happened, that a Muslim terrorist had attempted to execute his wife, but was stymied by the American police. It took Rehana a long time to overcome the shock of the incredible sight she had witnessed. When she finally spoke, she explained who the terrorist was. Neither Michael nor Christina believed what they heard. The family approached the police station in complete silence, trying to insulate the two daughters from the horror of the incident. At the police station, Rehana Khan confessed that the boy who was killed was her son whom she had lost contact with. She wept copiously for the innocent memory of a boy she remembered. After recording her statement, she explained to her daughter and son-in-law the name of the boy and his history. Christina had never seen her brother until that fateful day. Rehana also told them that she had conceived him after being raped in Jeddah and birthed him in prison. She explained how he was influenced by her third husband and eventually found favor with hardliner fundamentalist Muslims, culminating in him becoming a mujahid. The initial investigations by the FBI tried to determine the extent of Mustafa Abdul Gawad's network in the States, eventually uncovering evidence pointing out to him being a lone wolf. The police, too, tried to define the link between him and his mother, finding it implausible that mother and son had simply worked independently to locate Christina. For that reason, Rehana Khan was detained for some time. Mustafa Abdul Gawad alias Irvin Khan was registered as a Pakistani student. Rehana said that she knew only her son Irvin Khan. The police surmised that the name Mustafa Abdul Gawad was an alias purely to facilitate his entry to the States. Through the combined reports of the Indian police and the American consulate in Mumbai, the FBI uncovered the rationale behind Irvin's illegal entry into Pakistan and why he assumed a new identity. No matter how the American police tried, they could establish no link between the mother and her son's mission. In due course, she was released and allowed to continue living with the Lewinskys. Through the police, Christina Lewinsky came to know of Irvin's mission and how he made his way from Pakistan. They also told her how he had managed to track her down. The only error in the recreation of the crime was the fact that her brother did not recognize her as his own sister. Some of the officers believed that her brother might have not attempted to kill her if he recognized her. In any case, the attack showed that the Lewinskys' safety had been compromised, and similar attacks were probable in the future. Both her husband and the Justice Department recommended that she change her name and move to an undisclosed location, taking cues from the Witness Protection Program. Under advisement, she assumed the identity of Susan Johnson, deliberately picking commonplace names that would help shield her from discovery. What the Lewinskys and the American police did not realize was that the Muslim terrorists were not about to let this failure go unchallenged. Their code and reward systems ensured that anyone who spoke against their faith should never be allowed reprieve or respite. With their increasing presence in more and more Western centers of population, it was only a matter of time. The Muslim diaspora multiplies rapidly in the West via polyglot families and from the immigration of refugees influxes. Ingratiating and burrowing into the local fabric, it was conceivable that the next attack on Susan Johnson and her family would originate from Muslims already in the employ of the police, military, or intelligence agencies.